Welcome to the Culture Think Tank, where we discuss the trends and analytics of culture facing us today. Our goal is to help provide insights and best practices organizations and leaders can use to strengthen their cultures during today's new normal. I'm Will Lindstrom, and with me here is my partner, Delise Crimmins. Good morning, Delise.
Good morning, Will. How are you?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to today's discussion. But before we begin, we kind of summarize what we've heard so far this week. We've really been focused on understanding from a CEO's perspective, what are the critical factors that people are facing, organizations are facing with the remote work environment. And those basically boil down into three big buckets. One is success is really predicated on helping staff and workforce get their workstation set up. Because working off of a laptop for a day or two is doable, but when you're doing extended periods of time, having better workstations, dual screens, taking their workstations from home is definitely a benefit. The second thing is leaders really need to start rethinking the 8 to 5 schedule, especially with parents having to not only educate their children, but also deal with their kids. And then finally, the last piece is really focusing on trust, which boiled down into giving people the autonomy, communicating without micromanaging, and then invest in patience and flexibility. So I look forward today where we get to discuss the other side of the coin and look at things from a non-executive perspective.
So today we had the opportunity to interview a gentleman who shares my last name because he is my son. And Aden, you graduated from the University of Texas in the business school about 2 years ago, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And you went to go work for Crown Castle in Houston, and you were deployed, as it were, by your organization. So we've talked this week with executives who have deployed their employees, and now we want to talk to you about what it feels like from your perspective, from your point of view. You were traveling back and forth, and then suddenly you came back to Houston. You were told that you needed to go work from home. So tell me a little bit about that, how that felt for you, and what you thought about it at first.
Yeah, so to kind of reiterate, I had gone actually on some paid time off and took a little vacation to Lake Tahoe to go skiing, which was kind of before everything had started to really erupt. But by the time we were coming back, things had started to get a little more serious. And we ultimately had a meeting that Thursday after I returned. Thought it was a normal kind of staff team meeting. And we sat down and kind of led off with, as some of y'all may know, as some of y'all will come to find out, we're going to post an article on kind of our company intranet that says if you've traveled in the past 14 days, you need to quarantine for the remainder of that window. And then going forward, we're going to start alternating teams working in the office and then not working in the office, working from home. So it was a little awkward because I had no idea that this was the case, and I was sitting in a room full of people who, some of which haven't traveled, and all the eyes were glancing at me initially. But we kind of took care of what we needed to that day, and then it, for lack of a better word, we're kind of sent home to work for the remainder of the week. So it kind of made things a little more real at the time. But I mean, you kind of hear the words working from home, and you kind of get a little bit of excitement about it because you're not dressing up, going into the office, having to put on your best face and stuff like that. So it was kind of mixed feelings at first.
And it sounds like Crown Castle was one of the first to send people home. I mean, that was the earliest I'd really heard of them doing a remote workforce.
Yeah, I had a couple friends in like startups here and there who always seem to be on the earlier side of moving towards things like that. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I sent out a message to kind of my buddies, just letting them know, almost kind of a brag. And they responded back with, yeah, we're either moving to it next week, or we're starting a similar program, or we're just kind of waiting for the email type stuff.
Well, what's been the biggest struggle for you working from home?
So a couple of things. Obviously, having the lack of daily interaction with your team is always tough. It leads to inability to kind of collaborate, realign on where you are in projects and stuff like that. And then another difficulty around that is kind of not being able to set up a plan for projects. Our team is kind of a fast-moving group that always has something new coming through the pipeline. So our initial worry about that is just how are we going to break these things up? How are we going to split it up? A lot of the work we did had to be done in the office because of certain softwares like Bloomberg that we use and stuff like that. So there were quite a few initial challenges that we were working with as it came out. But I mean, the main ones that you would think about are just not having that main desk setup that you use and know every single day, where you have multiple screens, whatever it is, you have your keyboard, your mouse, all that stuff, and kind of ample space to move around and your coworkers down the hall from you. So I would say that was the initial struggle, but as things have kind of gone on, the things that start to get tough are maintaining productivity. I mean, you have a TV in your house immediately next to you, you got an Xbox, whatever it is. It's tough when times are slow to stay strapped in and working and productive all the time. And then another struggle I have that hasn't really been addressed in our group, but I think we've kind of been managing it the best we can, and it's something that'll probably get raised over the course of the next couple of weeks as things go on, is actually knowing when to kind of just call it a day. So my group, traditionally when we were in the office, our normal day, as we called it, was pretty much 8 to 6. That was just what you were expected to be in the office for, with the exceptions of like Fridays or something like that, like maybe you get out a little bit earlier. But for the most part, we were online from 8 to 6 and pretty much had work coming through at all times. And I mean, on average, I would say I was in there from 8 to 8 at the normal end. So now that I'm home and workloads have slowed down a little bit, it's tough to know when you can log off, so to speak. So figuring out when that work day is over. Sorry, go ahead.
How have you handled that? How do you decide that?
Yeah, and again, it's just kind of something I'm working on as it goes on. Right now, it's just checking in with teammates and saying, hey, look, I'm kind of reaching the end of my workload for the day, or reaching the end of kind of what I feel like I can get done for the day. Is there anything I can help you with? And that message kind of goes out as we start to near the 5:36-ish mark. I try and stay online until around then, but it's all about just kind of feeling it, because, for instance, last week on Friday, I think I called it at like 5:36 as normal, and then started kind of just my night, cooking dinner, had a beer, whatever it was, and then I got an email at like 8 o'clock, 8:30 on a Friday from my boss, and was like, hey, can you do this for me? And there was no window on it or anything like that, or no deadline, but it was just something that I knew would be helpful for him to have now. And as much as it probably could wait until either tomorrow or Monday or whatever it is, I just decided to knock it out there. But that kind of started me down that path of like, all right, when is it that I do say like I'm leaving the office, figuratively? So because in the way things used to work, if you left the office, for the most part, you were offline for the night. Occasionally, if you had to leave early for something, you get back on later. But yeah, it makes it tougher to kind of delineate between your time and when you should be actively working.
Yeah, it's almost a leadership issue to say, what are the boundaries that you need to set with your employees so that they don't feel like there is no off time, because you guys need that. How have you solved the collaboration problem? You said, working with your colleagues, not being able to collaborate. Have you all been able to do anything successfully with collaboration?
Yeah, my team's been actually really good about it. We have a senior analyst who's been with the group for a little while, and he's kind of served as more of a manager role than anything, I'd say. I mean, he has 2 analysts and an intern under him. And then we immediately jump up from that senior analyst to a director and a VP. So he's been my manager, so to speak, and we've maintained and always have had really good line of communication. So we've just kind of continued that. We have weekly, bi-weekly calls, whatever it is, just to check in and kind of reset at the beginning of the week. But then we kind of have like a running document that just shows what we're working on, crossing it off as we finish it. And then just, reaching out as needed to say, hey, I have some free time, I have capacity to help you out, or I need some help with this. It's been not too different than it normally is, but actually one thing the company did do that was really helpful was they've expedited the rollout of some new softwares. I think we're working with Microsoft Teams right now as one. I haven't used it too much, but I know that it has a lot of positive feedback right now, where they're implementing new software to help kind of ease that collaboration.
Good. That's great. What's one thing that you wish that your company would do more of?
I mean, I to be honest with you, my company has always really been kind of a champion of culture, and that's something that they preach. And so that's been widely appreciated. There really isn't something I can think of off the top of my head. They've really done a great job of kind of rolling with the punches as they come. This is all uncharted territory for pretty much everybody. So I think they've done a great job of keeping everybody informed and up to date with things as they roll. But I mean, if I had to think of one thing, it would probably be something along the lines of just resetting expectations. And this isn't necessarily the company as a whole. It may just be my team, because we've always been so willing to take on projects from outside of our corporate finance group. So we need to probably, and have started the process of kind of resetting a realistic workload for us working remotely, because again, a lot of the projects we would work on in the past just are going to have to come to a pause. But yeah, I mean, if I had to name something, that would probably be it, but we have already started that process. So there's really not some major item I can think of.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. And I'm glad that they're focused on culture. As you know, that's the name of the game around what we do. How do you see culture being affected by this dispersed workforce?
Yeah, there could be pros and cons to it. I mean, on the plus side, I would say that people do feel valued in the fact that they're constantly communicating with us, the fact that they're working hard to keep us updated and kind of what they're thinking about, what their timeline is and stuff like that. I think that goes a long way with people. Additionally, our company moved pretty early, which I think is going to be seen as a big positive for a lot of people. The fact that we were one of the first companies to go home just means that, again, our company was thinking about the people there, and that only helps to build kind of that culture and relationship that's going on between company and employee. On the negative side, I mean, I would say there's kind of some obvious things, that just the lack of face-to-face interaction. That's one thing our company has always really preached. They've kind of hesitated to not necessarily allow people to work from home, but make that normal in regular times. There are always the exceptions or the short-term cases where they're always more than willing to work with you on that. But given such a strong culture, they believe that a lot of that is developed and built in the actual office. So building those relationships with people face-to-face is important. So maybe a little bit of slippage there. And then I just think kind of workloads becoming unbalanced is also a difficulty. I mean, some people could just be working in silence and really kind of grinding away on a workload that they could be receiving help on. And other people may just be kind of sitting back in silence and on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe waiting for work to come their way that they could be helping to pick up on. So that could create a little bit of tension there, but I don't see a huge detriment to it, but those are a couple possibilities.
Okay, that's great. That's great feedback. So if you had an audience of people who are about to be deployed, say next week, what's the one thing that you would say, if you do this, it'll make it easier for you as you start your home work environment?
I think it's just important to kind of continue to reach out to your team and say, hey, if you have the bandwidth, help them out. But the main thing that's been most important for me is just really learning to build out that work-life balance. It's almost tougher now because, again, as I said earlier, you have to figure out when it is time to call it for the day and start spending time focusing on yourself. I mean, being quarantined in for myself, a 750 square foot apartment for 7 days a week, you have to figure out when it's time to kind of start decompressing a little bit, go for a walk, whatever it is. So I would try and set those expectations up front so it's not too tough. And luckily my team's done a great job of being understanding about that. For instance, I think it was like 5:15 yesterday. I was like, look, guys, I'm really getting stir crazy here. I'm going to go for a little bit of a walk. And if y'all need me later, I'll happily jump back online, but I'm just going to have to call it a little earlier today. And they were more than willing to hear that. And they all kind of voiced similar thoughts there.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing that, Aden. You had great insight and great tips and good thinking for us to help other organizations as they move into this as well. Will?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you again. We're approaching the end of today's segment. So as always, we like to close with key takeaways and best practices. And hearing from Aden, I think what we're learning is we're seeing a synergy, or at least a commonality, between executives and non-executives perspectives. And we're seeing the same kind of feedback that a workstation is really critical in transitioning from, you know, an office environment where you have lots of technology to a workstation where you don't is a challenge. The next that I think we're hearing is, which is a little bit different, is setting expectations. I think executives are focused on communicating and setting the plan, but I think Aden brings up a good point of, you know, when is the day done? Especially if you're working at home, you know, when is the day done? When does my time start versus when's work time? Because when you're in, you know, a 750 square foot apartment, in Aden's case, you could be potentially on call the whole time, and I don't think that is good. And also, culture is really, again, being played as a key role. Organizations with strong culture and need to invest in their culture at this point in time. But also, I think organizations, and similar to what we heard with Tim McClanahan, there's a challenge of growing a culture that was dependent upon face-to-face office environment. And now I think organizations as a whole are going to have to start to take on the challenge of how do we develop and continue to sustain and grow a culture when many, many people are remote. And, you know, things like Teams and other technologies can play a role, but also I think there needs to be a dedicated focus to, okay, we're going to figure this out, and we're going to work together. So that's the end of today. Again, Aden, thank you. Appreciate it very much. Please join us tomorrow. We'll be joined by Cynthia Kyriazis, a productivity strategist and coach who has worked with Fortune 500 companies, corporations, and small businesses. She's the author of Amazon's bestseller, Get Organized, Get Focused, Get Moving, and was named one of the 28 best online productivity experts by best-selling author and columnist Hank Reardon. Cynthia will help us wrap up this week, and we'll begin to look at the analytics of remote work environments and what the new norm should look like. It should be a great discussion.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Aden, again for being here. Good luck, son. And thanks, Will. Stay safe, y'all.